Hello everyone once more. Hello Ty, how are you?
I'm doing really good.
That's great. First of all, congratulations on getting into the program. Was it stressful?
Very, very stressful, yes.
Do you think it had impact on the level of your play?
Yeah, there were spots where the stress definitely affected.
Positive impact, I guess, right?
Yeah.
You played better due to adrenaline.
I would say I played a lot worse in game 3 than I probably would have if I hadn't which was the game against Falk.
Oh, yes, this is the one we're going to start with.
Yeah, it makes sense. I would say that especially my opening in that game was affected by the fact that I didn't have a break. My game
okay.
I played a really bad game, got really lucky at the end in round 2 against a weaker opponent, and it was the final one of the round to finish, so I got absolutely no break before diving into white against Falk, and that definitely affected how I approached that whole game, and not positively.
That's important. That's important. Yes, I would like to start with the game you played against Falk, but now I have more background, so obviously that's important. You guys don't know that it's as similarly as in case of Seth. It's our first session. By the way, I'm not sure if people can hear us. Double check one thing. We can. Okay, that's great, because my OBS says that you're not hearing me, but it's fine. So it's our first session, but in the meantime we had a long discussion about the way you see yourself as a chess player, about your background, about your training history, etc. And now one of those things you mentioned as potentially a thing that needs to be improved in your case is strategic understanding, especially finding a way for you to be able to self-study, independently study strategy, right? And this is something I would definitely like us to work on in our individual sessions. So even though, of course, the main event, the first event we're going to prepare for is the tactical event, there's going to be another endgame event, but in long run, we're preparing you for the tournament. And also, of course, one of the goals is to try to make you a better chess player in long run. I know you have ambitious goals, so I think it's going to be for your career, it's going to be a good idea to work on the strategy. Does it make sense?
To me.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So Ty is a completely different player from Seth, in my opinion. Seth is more of a strategic guy who kind of has a good feeling about where the pieces should be placed. Ty is a killer. He goes for the throat and he loves attacking. Is that correct? Would you say this is the first statement?
I go for it whether it's exposed or not, which doesn't always work out. But...
That's true. That's true. That's true. Chaos would be your middle name if I were to make a choice. Chaos would be Ty. First Ty, then Chaos. Yeah, it's hard to understand. It's hard to explain that, but in many games, out of nothing, there is a position occurs which I totally don't understand in your game. There were situations like that. But yeah, first let's take a look at the game you played against Falk, because I think it's a really instructive one. So let me paste it real quick. Yes, this is chess numbers. By the way, why chess numbers? I think I have some idea why chess numbers, but people don't know you, so maybe you want to share something about that?
Yeah, so I have a chess statistics blog where I focus on tracking top prodigies and analyzing top level professional tournaments and predicting the odds and all that kind of stuff at chessnumbers.wordpress.com. So I use chess numbers as my chess alias anywhere that I set up after I launched the blog in 2015. Not on chess.com because I've had that account since much earlier.
Okay. But there is no, sometimes you can bet on, I imagine that if there's right now there's a match between Carlsen and Nepo, and I'm sure there are some websites where you can predict the result. Would chess numbers be helpful to get the proper result?
I think so. I did a preview an article on the odds of the match.
And what is going to be the result?
I had it at an 81.5% chance that Carlsen would win the match before it started. And if we get a second draw today, the odds will still be very much in that range.
Okay.
Specifically, two draws will add a percentage point and a half to Nepo's chances, but Carlsen will still be 80.1% with 12 games left.
That's crazy. That's already beyond my understanding of the statistics. Okay, I
Shortening
trust
the
you.
match while it's still tied is good for the underdog.
Yeah, I imagine that. Yes, this was also, I had this long discussion with Igor Kovalenko, a grandmaster from Latvia. And he said that the longer the match, like no one can beat Carlsen in a long match. That in a 4-game format, yes, but in a 24 game format, it's impossible to beat him. I think it makes perfect sense.
As the match gets longer, more chance for the higher players class, the stronger players class to show, and less chance for a little bit of randomness to get the underdog through.
Exactly. Totally agreed. Okay, people are saying that there is some quality issue, like there is some lagginess there. Okay, let me make sure that I'm not using any unnecessary resources. Okay, so you had white with Falk, and as I already mentioned to you in a message we exchanged, this game inspired me to recommend you a book, or generally to work on your pawn structures. So very quickly on out of the opening, the Alpine Sicilian, we got into this position. So first knight c3, this is maybe inaccurate, we can talk about this in a second. It looks very innocent. So white has a very nice knight in the center, but all of a sudden, after bishop g7, which is a logical development move, you felt the urge to attack him right away with bishop b5. And after a pretty logical sequence of moves, although I would argue with bishop d7, taking the bishop is so logical, such a position occurred. Strategically, this is already very bad for white. Very bad, if not even lost. If you give this position to Carlsen and Nepo, the player with white will not score a lot of points, to be honest. I'm sure about that. Why is that? Any ideas?
I don't know. It seems I would have thought while I was playing that it hadn't been ambitious enough to have any edge for white, but I don't know that I saw it as bad either yet. Like I have that hanging pawn structure, but white has everything on the back rank. Black's got some development, but
so the fact that there is this hanging pawn structure actually makes it the only issue that is important here. Whenever you have hanging pawns, like similarly to isolated pawn, hanging pawns have their pros and cons. Whenever the position is dynamic, whenever there is lots of pieces on the board, especially minor pieces, you will probably get a complex game where you will not even feel that your pawn structure is statically bad. What does it mean statically bad? That you will need to protect it with your pieces. You cannot, they are not independent. Those pawns on c3 and d4, without minor pieces on the board, they will be a target, a huge target, to be honest. And even though, as you said, black has maybe certain problems with space, or the fact that most of his pieces, well, the rooks here are just placed on the back rank, it's not an issue for him. Why? Because if there is not so many pieces on the board, the space doesn't matter all that much. So actually exchanging so many pieces helped him in many respects. First of all, you got a very bad pawn structure where you don't want to have such a pawn structure if there is a simple position. Ideally, black would also want to exchange the bishops or even the queens and just put pressure on the pawn on c3.
Okay.
Just even along the c file. This will be more than enough. We will get into details in a moment. Second of all, if one of your advantages here is the space advantage, you should, under no circumstances should you exchange pieces. Because when you have less space, if you reverse this concept, if you have less space than your opponent, there are two ways to fight for that. You can either find space, so fight for it effectively, but it's like buying land in New York, I imagine. Good luck with that, oftentimes. It will be difficult to do that. Or you can exchange pieces so that with the limited space you have, you will still be able to find good spots for your pieces. Because two pieces will not be fighting for... There's usually one good square, for example, for two pieces. You will not face this problem when you have just a couple of pieces on the board. So it's generally beneficial for black to exchange lots of minor pieces here, which you did voluntarily. And
right.
in order to avoid such a decision, you just need to know, okay, so I have hanging pawns. I cannot exchange my pieces like that. I just have to avoid that, and it will be a good game. And then you will not feel the urge of playing bishop b5, but because it looked like you were trying to force the matters, even though this was not justified. Positionally not justified.
Yeah, that sounds right.
So
and the mindset again was very much I had not gotten my brain really back in it, so I didn't want complications, and I didn't understand strategically how bad all this was.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, well, sigh, I guess if all these pieces come off, I don't have anything. But I thought maybe like I don't have anything, but it's fine.
So you will not have any problems because the position is going to be simple. Is this
okay? Yeah, something simple. I couldn't handle complicated after the way the previous game had ended, and so I thought simple was just okay. And then he proved everything you're saying about how bad it was strategically by just grinding me from here.
So it feels like playing for a draw, and which is one of the worst things you can ever do in chess, because if you play for a draw, or if you play, if your attitude is to avoid unnecessary risks, you will probably just get a worse position where your opponent will torture you for 30 moves or so, which is exactly what happened in this game.
Exactly what happened.
So you should just always try to approach the position according to its requirements. So even if you want a draw, but the position requires you to play actively, you need to play actively. Otherwise, it will backfire. 100% sure it will backfire.
Yep.
So always, according to the demands of the position. Considering all of that and knowing the result of your line, what would you play instead of bishop b5 if you're given another chance?
It still feels like developing the bishop so that I can castle is key here, because I'm certainly not going queenside with the open b file. So probably bishop c4 comes to mind. Okay.
What do you need to consider if you're thinking about a move like bishop c4? Because you're attacking, right?
Yeah. Right. So bishop takes e5 is one thing to consider. Would that exchange be good for who? Mm-hmm. It's still pieces coming off. It changes the hanging pawns into just an isolated c pawn.
How do you feel about it?
Let's see, bishop c4, take on e5. If I trade queens, he can't castle, but I'm not sure if there's enough on the board for that to be a problem for black.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not a problem for black, then that isolated c pawn is a problem for me.
Mm-hmm. You still have the bishop pair, so is
the bishop pair. I'd probably rather play that than what I got in the game, but I'm not sure that's what I'm trying to aim for from where I sit right here. Queens off with a bishop pair, and opponent king in the center and I still have 2 rooks might be something, but it still feels like it's going to go to an endgame with an isolated c pawn.
I feel that this is taking unnecessary risks, because I'm not sure myself how to evaluate it, but this is something I would definitely try to avoid, because if black manages to trace the queens of the board and goes knight c6, then black goes knight c6. In a moment he will maybe even trade the bishops off, like going bishop e6, and you will end up with this permanent weakness on c3. I don't really see how you're going to find any sort of active play. So in practical sense, this just means it will be a much easier position for black.
Right.
And if we take into account that there is a rapid game going on where you need a certain, you know, amount of certain number of easy moves to be played, because it's much easier to play a rapid game where you just know pretty much what to do. This is just not a good position to go for. It's better to avoid it. It just doesn't feel right. It gives black too much. And the lack of the bishop pair for black is not a big deal. You will never take advantage of those dark squares because probably black is still castling queenside. So dark square not a problem. Dark square is not a problem at all. So alternatives, more alternatives.
So if we don't like what happens on the bishop exchange, then moving the knight again is another option, though it's never super comfortable to move a piece that many times in the opening. But
by the way, have you been watching? Did you watch the preliminary event and the commentary? Because we've been discussing a couple of your games actually, and I had this discussion with David about one of your games, which we're actually going to take a look at, where you move your move for the second time in a row. Yep. So
yeah, that one we'll talk about that one later. I know. There were, I think, very valid reasons for me to look at that move, but I completely missed I just completely missed that knight h6 was legal.
Yeah, I was also trying to, you know, justify your decision making, and I was actually keeping your, like, I was arguing for you.
I appreciated that. Yeah, I did watch the video on that one afterwards. Yeah, I can talk about why I looked at the move, and I think there were valid reasons for it, but I should have looked at it, seen knight h6, and moved on. We're going to show that in a moment. We'll talk about this later. We'll talk about that later, and it got back to seeing a really obvious defense.
But in general terms, of course, you don't want to make a second move in a row in the opening with the piece that you know. There's a single piece you developed.
Yeah.
You don't want to make another move with it. So what else?
Well, if I don't like that exchange and I don't have a great attacking option with the light squared bishop, I'm wondering if maybe there's a bishop f4 so that if takes on e5, I can take back with the bishop and not run into some of the problems from the last line.
Yeah, that's already a huge improvement. Definitely. So bishop f4 looks like probably the most logical move to me. The other move I was considering actually was queen b3. And as compared to bishop c4, if there is an exchange on e5, yes, your pawn structure is slightly damaged, but then you can still argue that there is a position with the queens on the board, and therefore king safety will be an aspect, will be something to consider.
Room to do some things before that isolated c pawn is a endgame.
Precisely, and oftentimes in the Alapin you actually end up with having this pawn structure, like the just bad c pawn, and as long as there is active play, dynamic chess on the board, you can live with that. But when we're talking about static chess, so strategy, maneuvering, exchanging pieces, and black being able to apply pressure with you having a counterattack, it's a no-go. So trading the queens off, not in this line. So queen b3 looks interesting. I would still play bishop f4 because it feels so much more natural. Then you will just play bishop d3, kingside castle, queen d2, bishop h6. Feels normal to me. And rook e1. Or bishop c4, actually. Why bishop d3? Bishop c4 looks fine as well. Maybe even slightly more ambitious. Okay, so you ended up in this pawn structure, and everything was better than that, to be honest. Because if you're playing a position like that with white, I mean, white is not having any chance to get to win that. Well, you won that game, but only because of the Falk's obvious mistake at the end, where he blundered the rook.
When you're as bad as we are, there's always a chance to win somewhere
I know.
But that's not what I'm playing for.
So many rooks were blundered in that event. But yeah, honestly, due to the lack of the control of light squares, white's position is just so miserable. And he played the model game. So for future reference, if you're meeting Falk in the event, I would be actually quite careful when going for this kind of a position. It's not that you should be afraid of him, because why should you ever be afraid of anyone in this range? But he knows how to play such positions. And it's quite clear that he knew that, first of all, what was required was to double up along he didn't even double up along the c file with the rooks, but he established a very nice pressure because he played queen c6, very quickly exchanged the queens, so now you have no counterplay whatsoever, applying pressure on the pawn on c3. In a moment he also split your pawn structure by playing e5. I remember he also managed to find the second weakness. Yep. In practical terms, it's a very bad position, and also a very
completely tied me down, just defending all my weaknesses, so I couldn't do anything, and then picked me apart.
Exactly. So I think it will be like, just considering this game, it was just a bad decision to go for this kind of seemingly safe position, where actually you were left with no attacking prospects, and black had such an easy game, such easy play. You don't need to be a master to find that c3 is weak, and you can just double up the rooks and just attack those pawns placed on dark squares. So that's one thing. And also for your future progress, I recommended this book where the author discusses every single important typical pawn structure, starting from I even have it on my desk, starting from the isolated pawn, going to hanging pawns. There is even queenside kings in the defense pawn structure, Queen's Indian maybe also, but you're not playing it, right? You're playing King's Indian defense. There are also Sicilian structures, so he's discussing structures that typical pawn structures that could arise from certain openings, including the openings you play. So I think that by just reading that, you will recognize those types of positions much quicker, and you will have the ability to react properly in advance.
Yeah, and that I think is a really, really good book for me, because I mean, my repertoire is kind of designed around the idea that I can go into crazy tactical stuff against e5, and against anything else with white, I can play for these either hanging or isolated pawns. And if I know them really well,
exactly,
most people at my level don't.
Yes.
So that's where I play the Alapin, the Panov, and even the Monte Carlo French, all kind of giving me those same pretty similar pawn structures, which would be great if I knew anything about those pawn structures.
Yes, I think it's a really good starting point, or not a starting point, but it's generally like one of my favorite strategy books. So I don't really want to reveal the title right now. It's not advertising, but I will just paste the link to the fans so that you can take a look at that.
I'll say that about somewhere near the end of Seth's lesson, I went ahead and did buy that book on Chessable and read the introduction already.
Oh, okay.
I haven't looked at any of the positions yet, but I read the intro. Yeah, so I have that one now, and I'm definitely going to look at the chapters that tie to the openings I play very soon.
Okay, I'm just pasting the link. It's just from Amazon, but you can find it's only in English. You can find it anywhere you want. Okay, so I think that you realize what the decision making, your decision making in this game was bad, right?
Yeah, and even as I was making each trade, I was like trading and sighing at the same time. Like, this isn't good, but I don't know what else to do.
Mm. Yes, once the sequence started, it was difficult to stop. But actually, if you have this, because we can actually discuss that as well. If you see bishop d7, I would still, because it felt like you just went all in for a penny, out for a pound. You went with this idea, okay, I will give a check. There was an opportunity to exchange, so you just went for it. You could still play bishop c4, in my opinion. So
yeah,
in chess, it's very important to be able to admit you made a mistake. Of course, it's more important to realize you made a mistake.
And after bishop d7, now if Black tries to trade on e5, the queens don't immediately come off. So.
Very good observation, exactly.
And also now queen b3 ideas get really interesting with that bishop on c4. That's
and the pawn on b7 not being protected.
That's a pattern I actually normally play for in my Alapin repertoire.
Okay, so we were just blaming it for no rest. This was just not your original, not your normal level. So bishop d7, you can safely retreat, or I was already telling that to Seth that a good player knows which pieces to exchange, and an even better player knows when to do that. So or how to do that. So here, even if those bishops get traded off, you can still say to your opponent, okay, we can exchange, but on my terms. Why don't you just bring your queen to the game?
Yeah.
Even like that.
I'm pretty sure I even looked at that at some point, and I was like, I don't know. This is so much more me, and I don't know why I didn't go for something like any of these other options.
Okay.
I think I'll add in also I was 2-0 in the tournament at that point, and the pressure of trying to, ironically, the pressure of trying to not, I don't know, I felt like I was in a decent spot and I needed to not do anything really bad. And so I did something really bad. Okay,
this is very important. This is a very important point in the context of your upcoming events, right? Believe me or not, if you're, I mean, this is just some psychological remark I will try to make, and I strongly believe that if once you start thinking about the result, your level immediately drops. I've seen this from in my chess career, and also students of mine had issues with that. The moment you start thinking about like what will happen if I lose, or which position do I have in the standings, or what do I need to do in order to secure a first place, this is not the right way to go. Your games will you will see a huge drop in your strength. So try to, I know it's difficult, but try to like eliminate those thoughts. Only focus on your next move and try to find the best try to make the best decision according to the position's requirements. So if there is a, in this game you were actually trying to simplify the position in order to avoid risks, and you see how easily it backfired.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You just didn't get the position where you could go for that.
And that a situation where that similar thought process could creep in, the tournament final is going to be knockout. And so an example, it'll be slightly different. There won't be like I'm tied for first in the Swiss pairings thing. But if I were to go up a game in a short knockout match, there would be risk of, now that I'm ahead, if I just draw the next one, we're good, and playing for a draw. And that is not how I play chess. That is not how I should play chess.
Yeah, being
if I
cautious
win
of
the
the
first
result.
game and get up, I should go try to win another game and end it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, being cautious of the result is important, because you cannot, if you lost the first game, you obviously cannot go for a draw. But at the same time, you should try to, you know, play normally. The more you think about the consequences of the loss, of the result, of any result you're going to make, this can really backfire. So I know there's going to be some stake, there's going to be some, you know, prizes we're fighting for, but it shouldn't be the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal should be to play good chess, something that you will be, you know, you will be happy with the level of your play. That's it.
Yeah.
Just make sure you make good moves. Okay, so yeah, the queen b3 was okay. After bishop d7, you could still, if there is an exchange on d7, then maybe just trade the knight for the bishop and leave him with the knight on d7. Do something normal like castling, and at least save your bishop pair on the board. Also makes perfect sense. Again, you're probably not looking for this kind of a position with hanging pawns, but at least you still have something to play for. You still have, you know, imbalances that are beneficial for you. The bishop pair specifically. The position, as the position gets open, those bishops will become better and more important in the game.
This position doesn't fit my chess personality quite as much as either of those lines that we looked at with queen b3, but yeah, better than the game.
Exactly, better than the game. Whatever you played whatever you would play here would be much better than the game continuation. Absolutely. Okay. I will not torture you anymore with this game, because I think there are more interesting games, and I also prepared a couple of very nice positions for you, testing positions. So
okay,
let's move on. No time to be wasted. Okay. Should we take a look at this game where the immediate knight g5 jump was played? Okay. So you had white pieces. Right, all of that is normal. c3, d6, suboptimal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Knight f6 is the main move.
Yep.
Takes, bishop b6, and heel you feraled. That's the moment.
So this was
I'm giving checkmate.
So this was the classic trap of first move out of theory. Here, the move that I'm familiar with is bishop c4, check. Knight c5.
Bishop... Where? Bishop c4 check, where? After
instead of bishop c after d6 or after d4.
Okay. Bishop b4 check, you mean? Here.
Or b4, yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Bishop b4 check is the move I'm familiar with. And also, as you mentioned earlier, instead of d6, knight f6 is typical. Mm-hmm. So first moment I'm on my own, outside of any of the theory I have memorized, I got this idea in my head of, since black can't castle yet, and they didn't play bishop b4 check, so I have kind of an extra tempo of, yeah, knight c3 blocking the check develops, but it develops on, you have to do something about the check. With the bishop on b6 instead, do I have an immediate attack? And there are positions, not this one, it turns out, but there are positions where a relatively innocuous, relatively early position does allow for that. I had pretty recently studied a few positions like that in a Yusupov chapter, and also in a chess strategy chapter that I'm currently working on weakening the king. So I got this thought in my head that maybe this is a spot where knight g5 works because black can't castle out of it, and maybe then I'm going to have queen f3 or queen h5 ideas or something. And I think all of that to think about was reasonable to look at the move, but I just once I looked at does knight g5 work, I should have said, well, knight h6 defends the f pawn, and then there's nothing.
And that's pretty much it. That's true.
And that's it. And what happened in the game is I just did not see knight h6 complete blind spot. I actually think that if knight h6 was illegal, knight g5 might be a good move in this position.
I agree, yes.
So I just complete blind spot, did not see knight h6 at all. And
or for example, if the knight was already on e7, I could imagine knight g5 being strong, because then if castling, queen h5 pretty much seals the deal.
Yeah, I think there's a position with like put the knight on e7, and I think it's almost exactly one of the positions from Yusupov's book 1, chapter 6, which is the chapter of Yusupov I'm on right now.
Okay, that you made an impression that you know all of the chapters of Yusupov, and oh, this has to be chapter 6.
Only because that's the one I'm on right now. I don't remember by number the chapters I'm not doing. But I think with that knight on e7, it actually is within 1 or 2 pieces and 1 or 2 squares of a position that I have where knight g5 is the correct move. So that's why I was looking at it.
Okay.
But it wasn't actually that position, and I should have seen knight h6 and moved on.
Yeah, that's, of course, when you see knight h6, it doesn't make sense to play knight g5. So it's very important, it's good that you recognize those patterns, that you even, because some people would not even consider knight g5 because they know the rule, okay, I'm not supposed to make a second move in a row in an opening. Right, but there are exceptions, and this is what the point I was trying to make when discussing with David, that if there is something specific, if you know that, okay, I'm finishing him with knight g5 because I calculated the line, it's fine. But again, this is the condition, this is the prerequisite for playing a move like knight g5. You need to make sure. I did calculate
several lines without knight h6 where it looked like I might be finishing.
Okay. So just a blind spot. It was just
really bad blind spot on what's actually a really obvious defensive move. And
yes, so always consider those, even though you remember a pattern. Yeah, it's not easy to fix a blind spot because you either see it or you don't. It's always more difficult to find good defensive ideas for your opponent as compared to finding attacking ideas for yourself. That's obvious, but still, you know, try to use this reverse psychology, like what would I do if I were him? What would I try to do if I were him? Because generally people tend to calculate, tend to make chess a cooperative game. Like, we are both playing for the same result. We are both trying to prove that knight g5 works. No, it's not how it works. The opponent also tries to win. He will try to find the very best move. So finding a move like knight h6 is really important. It's really important to be able to spot that there is a reasonable move, which makes perfect sense. It's a logical move first and foremost, because it's a development. So he will play it. And then the question is whether you can still, you know, prove him wrong or not. Right, then you went knight f3, and it immediately turned out that there's nothing. You just lost the tempo, and
I spent so long on that move, almost.
That's also true. Yeah, I remember you were calculating.
And the reason
so
why
long.
On the stream, you and the commentators took 15 seconds to look at whether bishop e3 is an option and concluded it doesn't work. I did the same, but it took me a lot longer because I'm me. I spent probably about 3 minutes of that thing trying to find a way to make bishop e3 work so that
we're talking about yeah, this was
instead of retreating the knight.
Yeah, I'm just trying to
so that I could maybe justify
to the audience. So we're talking about bishop e3 and then knight d4, right?
Right, because the problem, of course, had been that I had a problem with knight g5 is that it abandoned the d4 pawn. Can I defend it and keep the knight out there and semi-justify the play? But the answer is no.
You're right.
And I spent quite a while convincing myself that the answer really was no, and that the retreat was all I could do. So now I not only have this bad position where I've moved the knight 3 times and 2 of them erase each other, lost a ton of time, and also lost time on the clock.
Unlucky, as Kostya would say. Unlucky. Yeah. I'm not sure if this is how often this happens, but I've seen a couple of games of yours where I think this is a kind of a, well, if not usual scenario, then at least it happened a couple of times before, that you're, as you said at the very beginning, you're looking for the throat even if it's not exposed, if you're going for a throat.
Yeah.
So it would be great if you manage somehow to change your attitude and realize that it's going to be much more difficult for your opponent to play a certain position if you play slower, if you don't play for a direct attack, if you build up your game a little bit. Because here you have the very easy, very evident advantage connected with your total control over the center. This in turn gives you the space advantage. It makes your game much easier if you just play this little prophylactic move, h3, preventing bishop g4, and then your pieces come out naturally. Knight f6, I imagine knight c3. There is of course all of those knight takes e4 threats you need to be looking at. But other than that, it's such a pleasant position. I mean, castles, maybe castling, maybe even bishop g5 right away. So it is actually black who benefits from going tactical, for making the game sharp, because then it's much easier for your opponent to react in a position when there is something to calculate.
Yeah.
Here, you're just a Python, pretty much. You're just suffocating him. It will be difficult for black to survive this position. I mean, of course, it's still, the game goes on, but it's a very unpleasant position. We can already say that.
Yeah.
It's quite
and I mean,
evident.
The only reason I looked at a move like knight g5 is because I did think I was better.
I know. You thought you were winning. Simply.
Can I realize it immediately tactically? And sometimes the answer to that question needs to be, I need to be able to recognize when the answer to that is no and build the pressure further instead.
Right. Or if there is if there is uncertainty. If you're like, if it's getting, foggy and you're thinking, okay, maybe there is something, but maybe I'd rather just avoid the risk, because if there is nothing, my position is going to collapse. And the longer the line, the bigger the risk of actually making the mistake. Tactical, strategic, or just bad evaluation. So, and it applies especially in positions where you already have a certain advantage. Because in the worst case, you will probably still have your minimal edge and you will be trying to, make the game longer, but also safer, and you will be pressing. Right. In this game, you just went for the chaos, but it was actually the only way to play this. I was also thinking whether castling here was slightly better than just playing h4. Yeah, this is right now, we're not talking about chess anymore. This is just wrestling.
Yeah, I thought I had to play h4 because of d4.
Right, but something falls anyway. So
yeah.
at least you get your development fine.
Right. Trying to prevent the loss of material that's inevitable. Yeah, okay.
I'm afraid so, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe you could, I mean, no, knight takes d4 is going to be played anyway, right? I think this is the right moment to realize, okay, let me withdraw a little bit, let me just try to consolidate my position and take it from there. Or perhaps it's possible to go bishop takes h6.
Yikes.
What do you think?
I mean, I'm looking at queen g2.
Okay, so let's do a tactical exercise. I will take a sip of yerba in the meantime. And you do the tactics.
Because I see that if bishop h6, queen h6, that probably at least alleviates some of the pressure I'm stuck on. But if queen g2 works, this looks bad. So let's see. Well, I guess Because the queen is guarding the knight and the knight's guarding the H pawn, so that might be a position where I do just have rook G1. Yeah, I guess queen G2, rook G1. And I'm not finding another threat for black that's fast enough to stop me from saving my bishop, and I got the knight.
End of story. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other move for black you need to consider? Let's do it, our first tactical challenge.
There's queen e4 check.
Okay, good point.
But then queen e2. Then you can trade the queens, and then you get my bishop.
Wrong.
Yeah, that's no good.
No. After queen e4, you have a better move than queen e2.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Queen e2 allows black to trade the queen, get my bishop anyway, and so that was not there. But what do we have then? Oh, the bishop comes back to e3.
Thank you. Okay, yeah. Good. Any other option for black?
There's recaptures on h6. I'm pretty sure queen takes will be better. Those isolated
I'm not so sure. And also, practical advice, piece of advice, avoid assumptions. Whenever you're calculating, no assumptions, because those illogical moves may turn out to be the strongest ones. So take a look at g takes h6, please.
Okay, if g takes...
And what could be the benefit of playing g takes h6?
Keeps the queen still hitting those two undefended pawns that we just looked at.
Mm-hmm. It's a double attack. It's a fork. So you need to take that into account.
But then that gives me time to castle. Oh, but then there's rook g8 on that open file.
Or else? Or there's something else?
Castling doesn't defend the e-pawn, but I wasn't worried about queen e4 because of rook e1.
Instead of rook g8, black has, I think, a move which is maybe even stronger.
So rook g takes castles. Oh, there's bishop h3.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
We can already safely assume that this is not so great, but let me torture you a little bit. What would you still play after bishop h3? Let's consider this a test of your visualization and resourcefulness, or other fancy words.
I'm looking at knight h4.
Mm-hmm.
Not convinced it works yet, but it's...
No, it's good. You need to start somewhere.
h4. It doesn't have too many options there with the queen attack that I'm seeing. Queen leaves the G file. I can take the bishop.
Another piece of advice: whenever you're calculating, try being specific. Try considering only the right moves. So queen here, queen here, queen here. Because if you're the way you're like verbalizing your thoughts also affects your calculation. So whenever you're going to be very like vague in your calculation, there is a risk you're going to miss something. So it needs to be exactly like the lines the engine gives you. It never says queen leaves G file. It gives you queen f6, queen g5, queen g7, and there's always a proper move. There's no narration there. There's no hidden story there. Only the moves. Try to be like a machine. Whenever you're calculating, it's a move, 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 evaluation. Next one. Move, 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 evaluation.
G takes h6, castle, bishop h3, knight h4.
And now we find candidate moves for black. So
that's what I'm trying to find. There's so there's queen g5.
Let's start with that
move.
one. Queen g5. Okay. It looks the most natural, right? Staying on the g file, hitting the knight.
Yeah, I'm running out of resources there.
No, it's not a word. I never want to hear that. I'm running out of resources.
I didn't say that I am out.
That you're running out. You're not yet
running
out.
out.
Okay.
I'm seeing a lot of
shortage of resources.
I'm seeing a lot of moves that I don't feel make it to the level of candidate move.
Okay.
And trying to look through more options.
Very philosophic way to phrase it, but I really like it. You're not yet out of resources, but you're running out of resources. Okay.
I don't like it when I start running out of resources, but sometimes there still is one.
Yep.
I mean, there's a bite the bullet option of G3, giving up the exchange, but I sure don't want that to be the best option. Trying to find another idea.
That's something if you play if you really have to, if there is absolutely nothing else to be played.
And visualization is straining for me.
Okay.
Here. I feel like if it was on the board, I could at least find some candidate moves. But
I know. So let's stop there. As I was telling to Seth, there is one technique which is called stepping stones, where when you see that potentially the line you're going to have to calculate gets longer, it's a good moment. It's a good moment to stop there and try to make a mental snapshot of that position to ensure that you properly see it, and then make it your first position, your initial position, so that you start calculating from that point. You don't have to, this way you don't have to go all the way back when you're recalculating to make sure that your line is correct. So can you properly see this position? Where is the white's knight?
The knight's on h4.
Okay. Black queen?
On g5.
White's bishops?
White's bishops. Well, white only has one bishop now, but it's on c4 still.
Good. Black's bishops?
b6 and h3.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a pawn on g2 or on g3?
g2.
Okay. Right. Imagine that. Make it your initial position. Make sure that you actually see it. And now do the normal process. So we're looking for, again, forcing moves. We're still in the calculation process, so we're generally looking for forcing moves. Checks, captures, and huge threats. So basically attacking attacking stronger pieces with weaker pieces or pawns, or making
so moves like
threats
queen
against
f3.
Okay, queen f3. Now we're talking.
Not sure if that's quite enough of a threat, though. Can black just take queen h4 and then on queen f7 run to king d8?
Good question. Unfortunately, I'm not the one to answer that. I'm just a spectator here.
And I only say it out loud so that you and the audience have some idea what question I'm trying to answer.
Mm-hmm.
That's some sense of how far I am in this.
What changed in the position after queen takes h4? Important question.
The G pawn is no longer pinned.
Very important observation, yes.
Which might mean I don't even have to take on f7. I could just grab that bishop.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to take on f7 if it's good. And after I take on f7, I can still grab the bishop.
Okay.
So from what we were calling the start position for this round, after trying to take that snapshot, from that position, we're looking at queen f3, queen takes h4, queen f7, king d8, g takes h3.
Mm-hmm.
But now, not sure I do get away with that because the d pawn is undefended, and I think, and if there's bishop takes d4, that comes with the threat on f2.
Mm.
And oh wait, no, I've castled in this position. That was
Still, the position, I kind of agree that the position looks scary for white. It
Yeah,
looks scary for both players, but I'm not super excited about playing this with white.
I think that king's kind of just hiding on d8 without a dark squared bishop to jump in anymore.
And this is probably the right moment to stop. Whenever you see that
black has more pieces to bring in.
Yeah, whenever you see that there is a certain clarification of the position. So right now it's getting really chaotic, right? There is lots of stuff going on the board, but now everything settles and it's quite clear that white's king is very exposed. And on the other hand, as you said, it's difficult to attack the black's king on d8. It's surprisingly safe. So the line we were talking about, yeah?
I was going to say, it feels like that king should be vulnerable there. I've trapped it in the center. My queen's
exactly.
Right
it feels like that, but it's just no evidence.
Yep.
So the line we were talking about, g takes h6, surprisingly strong, and after castles there is rook g8, but potentially even stronger is bishop h3. And in order not to drop an exchange, there is knight h4, then black goes queen g5, and due to the stepping stones, we found queen f3. Queen f3, queen takes h4, and now you could take on h3 right away, but that looks scary, especially that black can castle queenside.
Mm-hmm.
And then
I don't want two rooks coming at those open files.
Very
I only want one rook coming, which is kind of the problem. With
one rook is really dangerous, not to mention two rooks. Agreed. So queen f7, king d8, g takes h3. This is the line, and now it pretty much doesn't matter whether black takes with the pawn, with the knight or the bishop. In any case, it feels like it's way too dangerous for white. Maybe with the bishop, in order to play knight e5 and engage even more pieces. Without the dark squared bishop, white cannot hurt black. This is the conclusion. Very good, very good.
Oh, and now now look at B2 and the
That's
corner even.
That's you know a side effect. That's side effect. Minor detail, right? No, it's just bad. It's plain bad for white.
That's an element that just means if I somehow did have a way to totally turtle on the king side, I might just lose a rook instead.
Yeah.
And I don't even think I have a way to turtle, but the fact that even if I could, yeah, that's ugly.
So the entire concept is just bad. Castling king side in this position, you could of course just avoid calculating that and just finish with it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right to castle kingside when there is an open g file and avoid this entire calculation, but it was a good exercise. And in practice, I would actually totally abandon the pawn on g2, to be honest, and play knight c3. Play knight c3 to protect the pawn on e4. Now the pawn on d4 is safely guarded, and if there is queen g2, you just play rook g1, and on queen h3, maybe queen b3, maybe rook g3, maybe rook g7. You have, I think, very good compensation for the pawn, or even knight d5 with knight f6 coming. There is lots of ideas you can opt for, and the fact that black has this damaged pawn structure on the king side at the very least gives you long-term compensation. So whenever you see a position like that, and even though it's all about practical evaluation, grandmasters, they often don't calculate that far. They just calculate 2-3 moves and quickly evaluate the position. When comparing those lines, it looks like, in practical terms, this is a much better version for white, because white here has pretty easy play, because he's going to castle queenside in a moment. This is the idea, with the king being very safe, as opposed to black's king, which is still in the center. And then we have the line where you castle and voluntarily go for, you know, you're inviting the opponent's army to just have the party of a lifetime. We do not want that. So I think that bishop takes h6 is maybe a way to save the entire position here. h4, h4. Well, you remained true to your style. The drawback, pawn on e4 hanging. Probably quite an important pawn. So again, also from purely like general chess understanding, better to lose a pawn on g2 as opposed to the central pawn. Unless you're getting checkmated, of course. Okay, and then this is one of those games where I totally didn't understand what's going on.
You and me both. No, I understood what was going on. I was getting crushed and just trying desperately to find swindle opportunities, really. But
are you so crushed, really? Are you so? Do you feel that this is such a miserable position for white?
I'm not sure if this was quite where that was true yet. At some point that was true, but
because I think you just you even made it worse by castling kingside, because clearly you've just exposed your own kingside with h4. Yes. So why would you ever consider castling kingside? As far as I can tell, if you play queen d2 or any queen move, but queen d2 looks very normal just to prepare queenside castle, you should be able to generate some active play on the king side, and then you will have a very important argument. If there is a position which is, I don't want to use the word static, but like relatively calm, when there is not much of tactics going on, not much of attacking going on, black is just going to enjoy a pawn advantage. And if you castle queenside, you actually made a certain progress on kingside already, because you're playing h4, and when there is opposite castles involved, you might actually just benefit from such a pawn race. And then the material doesn't doesn't matter all that much. What matters the most is the timing. Whoever gets a chance to open the opponent's kingside position. So if you play like that, he does something, I don't know, knight f5 I imagine, or knight g4, I'm not sure. Queenside castle, totally different picture.
Yes.
g4 coming in a moment, a knight d5, bishop g5, if he doesn't take. If he takes, you will improve your pawn structure slightly. Still prepare g4. Yes, black is up a pawn, but here you can say, well, I don't have a pawn, but I have compensation. I sacrificed the pawn to of course you blundered it, but you could claim you sacrificed it for the better good, for the greater good, for, you know, having attacking prospects on the king side.
One of my best tournament wins ever. I blundered a pawn on move 8, treated it like a sacrifice, and ended up checkmating on move 19.
Exactly, exactly. I think it's a very valid point right now. I'm not sure if I would even. I mean, probably black has to be better, but it's a different kind of game. Now black is underwater. It's black who needs to prove that there is no immediate attack, and it's the plan is, you know, true to your style, I think.
Yes.
As far as I can tell, you just love attacking. Perfect opportunity here. So instead, kingside castle. Not a huge fan of this idea, to be honest. What happened later on? Yeah, he played pretty well, I think. He played pretty well. Took the pawn on h4 in a moment. Okay, so he just blundered the rook, right? So were you the luckiest person in the tournament? Luckiest participant that... No, or did you blunder the rook? Who blundered the rook in this game?
He blundered first.
He blundered... he blundered...
After he gave me the rook, I had like 20 seconds on the clock, and I managed to turn it into a pawn down end game.
Yeah.
I did see when I put the bishop on b5, I actually, before he played rook e2, I was like, and he can't play rook e2 because my bishop still covers it, and then he played it anyway, which is why it was so easy to capture.
Yeah, that's true. Still, you know, if I assume this is going to be... This may not take place once more.
I wasn't in any way expecting it. It was just... I found it interesting that he went thinking about the game afterwards, that I had, for some reason, thought about whether or not he could play rook e2 here, even though, of course, he can't. It's weird that the thought even crossed my mind, but it made it a lot easier to grab it when he did.
It's good it did. So in any event, I think this is a perfect example of good and bad practical decision making. So as you could see, this game, even though you played knight g5, you could have made it a much more resilient game. Instead of dropping the pawn on e4, you could have given him the pawn on g2. Instead of going kingside castle, you could justify your pawn blunder and turn it into an actual pawn sacrifice by castling queenside. So my piece of advice is to always, you know, look for those moments where there's certain ways to proceed. Always try to look for this one where you have the best chances. Imbalances, basically. If you see that you're down a pawn, perhaps you need to make things a little bit more complicated, but also without you taking more risk. Your position was already very shaky. If you castle queenside, it's him who needs to prove that there is no compensation for you.
Right.
Or also when you give him the pawn on g2, he needs to prove that he can afford to take the pawn on g2, that you will not get proper compensation. Okay. I have two other games that you played in your recent practice. Did you check the opening that you played against Nargaev, or not yet? Because I think you have to do that because he just crashed you.
Yeah, and I've actually played him a blitz game several months ago. That same line, except I actually remembered my prep and I kind of crushed him. And this time I did not remember my prep. And
you know, it will be important. Well, I don't believe the openings will be the decisive factor in the main event, but this is also something that may have certain impact, because if you got a lost position after 11 moves, pretty much by playing normal legal moves. So it's pretty important to identify all of those. That's why I wrote to you about, you know, openings that you feel maybe uncomfortable with, or you would require certain additional work to put into them. Maybe this is one of those where, you know, we're probably not going to work on opening specifically, but as a homework, recap of King's Indian.
I already went back to my King's Indian course and added. I only had one Samish line that was actually like my memorizing learned lines, because I try not to memorize too much theory out of my chess school courses. I try to use the repertoire tree to check my games against, but I think it's not the best use of my time normally to just sit there memorizing specific moves. But I did add a second Samish line because I'm going to see it again from Nargaev.
Exactly. Where this is, I generally agree that if you're playing like, if we're talking about normal, regular, long-term progress, yes, you don't have to look at those specific lines, but you are going to meet the same people. So you might expect exactly the same lines to take place on the board.
Yeah, because there's an A6, knight A5 idea against the Samish that is what I play, or what I would say I play based on my course. And not what I played against him in that. Good.
So this is just, you know, for you to do your own self-study, self-preparation for the main event in your, like, in between the sessions.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, something very abstract, not taken from any of the games you played. Or actually, I will not paste the game. I will paste a certain position. There will be a strategic exercise for you, because the idea for today was just to talk about your general overall, you know, improvement, and this is probably something we will be dealing in individual sessions, and when we meet with Seth also together, we will be sort of preparing for particular events. So tomorrow there will be proper. We will pay more attention on tactics. Right now, since strategy is one of your main concerns, there will be strategic exercise. One of my favorite positions. It's not you didn't play that. It's taken from a game played between Botvinnik, so one of the world champions, and Vasily Panov. You know, the Panov variation in Karakan. You've probably heard of it. In any case, and a very old game. You have white pieces and you need to find a way out. You need to find a plan. You need to find a way to proceed from there. What do you think?
The first thing I saw was the sea pawns.
What do you think about them?
Doesn't look good. I don't like doubled isolated pawns that don't seem like they're doing anything.
This is actually a very good point to start with. Do you know any benefits of having isolated pawns, of having doubled pawns?
Yeah, so there are times that there can be help, that they can have strength. I mean, the files adjacent to them, they cover a lot of ground.
Okay.
So
in this specific case, are there any benefits of having doubled pawns here?
The pawn on c3 is controlling d4 for the moment, but that's not a benefit of them being doubled.
Yeah, that's true. So if there was a pawn on b2 and the other one on c3, you would still get the same result. But yes, at least you could say that, okay, maybe it's not a direct benefit of having doubled pawns, but at least the pawn on c3 covers an important d4 square. That was the point I was trying to make.
Pawn on c3 isn't so bad. The doubled pawn, it's the pawn on c2 that's more the problem.
On the other hand, is it a problem right now?
No.
So my definition of a weakness is something that is, well, we could talk about pawn weaknesses or square weaknesses, or at some points king weakness, although I don't consider king really a weakness, rather than it's rather a target. In any event, in my opinion, something can only be weak if it can be attacked. Right now, it's difficult to imagine a way for black to attack those doubled pawns, to be honest.
Yeah.
So this would not be my main concern. And why is it important to think about those issues? Because in a game you need to properly evaluate the position so that you you can make a good call whether to attack or whether to defend, or whether just to, you know, do something else. So leaving the pawns on c2 and c3 alone. Anything else? Any other observations?
Doesn't seem like black has any really obvious ways directly into my position right now, but they have better development.
How come? What makes black being better developed?
I mean,
I will argue. I will defend White's position. So I guess you're concerned about the bishops.
Yeah, I guess my bishops have good open lines from where they're sitting, though. Like, I don't like that they're on their home squares, but I guess they're doing a lot from where they are.
Exactly. The magical thing about the bishops is that they can be active even on their initial positions. So putting the bishop on e3 is actually an aesthetic move. Nothing more than that. It doesn't contribute to your position. The bishop is still the same piece on e3. Actually, you're interrupting the connection between the rook and the pawn on e4. Bishop on f1, where could it go? e2 doesn't make sense. d3 doesn't make sense. c4, it will just be challenged by the knight. f1 is the perfect square for the bishop. I know it's difficult to accept that, but it has to be this way. What else?
Open D file, semi-open B file.
Any weaknesses you can spot?
Pawn on G3 has potential to be a weakness around the king, but I don't necessarily see that it is right now.
Okay, let's go back to the definition of a weakness. What do you consider a weakness?
I don't have a great answer to that.
Okay. No, this is a very fair point. Okay, so in my opinion, we have two types of weaknesses: pawn weaknesses or square weaknesses. Pawn weaknesses, isolated pawn, but we all know that isolated pawn can turn out to be an asset rather than a liability. However, if we just consider the static aspects of isolated pawn, it's generally weak. Why? Because it's not protected and cannot be protected by any of the pawns, which makes it, which forces the player with an isolated pawn to protect it with pieces, which could potentially make them passive and have a bad impact on the entire position. Then we have doubled pawns. Same thing here. So doubled pawns are not independent. Oftentimes they cannot protect each other, and we have two pawns on the same file, so one is blocking the other. Backward pawn, because one of the pawns is sort of slower, the slowest guy in the gang, this usually makes the pawn weak and also creates a weak spot right in front of it. So these are the weak pawns, weak types of pawn weaknesses. Then we have a weak square, and this is a very important part here. A weak square is a square which is not controlled and will never be controlled by your enemy's pawns. Or, well, this is a strong square. Or your, if you're considering weak squares in your position, a square which is never going to be controlled by you, or is not controlled right now by the pawns. Squares that are not controlled and will never be controlled by one of the player's pawns.
Yeah, so it's the light squares around the king that are
so h3 certainly.
G3.
The definition
G2, H3.
The definition is fulfilled. Agreed. The definition is fulfilled. However, something is only weak. Yeah, so something can only be weak if it can be, you know, if one of the players can take advantage of that. So right now I have a feeling that you're only looking for weaknesses in your own position, which implies that you have a worse position. This is the feeling I'm getting. Is there anything weak in your opponent's position? The chat knows the answer. No pressure, no pressure. But they're silent. A square. Square which is not protected and will never be protected by the enemy spawns.
So like d5?
Like d5. What do you need to do when you see such a square? This should be your primary instinct.
Either control or occupy it are sort of
you are controlling it. You are controlling it with the pawn on e4. You are controlling it. Full command of the d5 square. You're just not using it. How to use it?
Love a knight there.
The knight there. Okay. This is. Now we're going to make you a magician. Imagine you're a magician. Very good point. We would love to have a knight on d5. If you were a magician and were able to make as many moves in a row as you can, in order to get the knight on d5, what would those moves be? How would you transfer the knight to d5?
Doing 4 moves to d2 to c4 to e3 and then to d5.
Okay, that's one idea. Such a diagonal for the knight, it's always at least 4 moves. However, there are ways which are faster and slower. Then you consider other aspects of the position. So if there is there a faster way, meaning that you will have some other benefits of using the other route other than this one? So the destination is d5. You can get on d5 only through e3. And so far, you propose to get to e3 from c4.
There's to h4 to g2.
Okay, then e3, then d5, and there's one more road.
Or h4 to f5 to e3.
Exactly. Which of those is the strongest? This one, this one, this one.
if I have the time to play all the moves myself, it feels like the h4 to f5 would be because it at least hits the queen along the way, but it feels
exactly.
like that one.
No, it's that.
Okay.
It's that. Exactly.
My hesitation and the reason I saw it third is because it feels more stoppable, because it uses my opponent's territory to get there.
Okay, but when you're playing knight h4, consider it a double attack. Here or here. So he actually, and you're threatening to play knight f5 with a tempo, so that's why this will be slightly faster than knight d2, knight c4. You're forcing him to play g6, and now we play knight g2. And then knight e3, knight d5. So your next question could be, okay, but how on earth, how will I even get a chance to do that? Because it takes 4 moves or whatever it is. It's so long, right? I could get this kind of a question. So of course there are types of positions where you can do that, and there are types of positions where you cannot do that. How to determine whether this is a good moment to find to go for a maneuver like that? We need to consider whether the position can change in the future. What is the probability of the type of the position changing? Basically, in closed positions or in positions where the pawn structure is established, where it's pretty much fixed right now, like right now, no immediate changes to take place on the board. There you can go for slower play, maneuvering, finding good exchanges, repositioning your misplaced pieces. That's why Botvinnik had exactly the required amount of time to go for knight h4, g2, e3, d5, because he knew that black cannot use that time efficiently in order to punish him for making a couple of moves in a row with the same piece. That's why, if you consider the opening principles, you're not supposed to play play a couple of moves in a row with the same piece, because usually the position is more open, or your position has an opportunity to open the position. Right now, it's definitely much closer than open, so that's why you can and should do that. You should go for this knight e3, potentially c4, and then knight d5. Whether you're going to play knight d5 immediately, it's a different story. But at least creating yourself this opportunity of putting the knight on d5 makes it a great maneuver. I will send you the entire game once we finish the session, so that you take a look at the entire thing, take a look at it, and see how fantastically Botvinnik converted this advantage. Because he was actually hesitating to play knight d5, and he was constantly terrorizing his opponent. He just proved that the threat is stronger than its execution. And only when the opportunity came, the perfect opportunity, when he was sure that he will actually like take the most out of it, he played knight d5.
Once you have the threat of it, just doing it for the sake might not be right. There might be a position where it just gets traded off immediately and you don't.
Yeah, in this case, he improved his entire position before he played knight d5, and also created a second front. So basically, he just played like knight e3, c4, bishop b2, played rook d1, repositioned the queen, and also he was threatening f4. So once he knew that the position is going to get open, only then he played knight d5, because he wanted to ensure that the bishops are actually going to be involved at the end.
That makes sense.
So he was waiting to find the optimal moment, because he knew that the opponent cannot do anything about that. This was the entire concept. And let me show you a similar example, which is a great proof that learning from the past masters is really important. This is Lajos Portis, so the Hungarian Grandmaster, versus Robert James Fischer. Have you ever heard of the guy?
Sounds kind of familiar, I think.
Right. So Fisher had black pieces here. What do you think he played? And I'm sure he studied the botfinning game.
Right. It's black to move.
Yes, yes, yes. Otherwise, knight takes c5.
Right.
one zip.
Which also means black has to either defend c5 or have a really good justification for not.
And good luck finding it. No, it has to be a defensive move, I'm afraid. It's all about finding the right setup. So I'm not even encouraging you to calculate anything here, because this is not the position for calculation. There is nothing forceful. There is nothing, you know, concrete. There are no lines. There are no threads. It's just about how to find the proper setup for your pieces. This is the kind of a question you could face in your game.
I mean, after the previous example, I'm obviously drawn to the d4 square, but this time there's better piece control of it than there was in the Botvinnik position. And black also has that hanging pawn.
I mean, there's just one knight protecting it, right? So it's sort of similar.
Sort of similar. What infinitely more knights protecting it, but it's only one.
In any event, would you agree that if black somehow magically manages to put the knight on d4, that will improve his position?
It'd be nice to teleport that knight to d4 while defending the pawn.
Yeah. If there was just, you know, if this was a legal move to teleport the knight, I think you would go for that, right? So how to do that? Don't be afraid to, you know, fulfill your dreams from your childhood, teleporting the knights. I'm sure we all been dreaming about it. Some of us wanted to become firefighters. Some wanted to be NASA pilots. Some wanted to have a chance to teleport the knights.
I wanted to be the official scorekeeper for a Major League Baseball team.
Oh, that's so American. Yeah,
I ended up with a test statistics blog.
Okay, that makes sense. It makes the entire story much more, you know, logical right now.
But looks like I'm gonna have to get there through e6.
Yes, always start from the destination, right? So d4. Yeah. So because if you start looking from f6, you will never get the right way. Never. So first d4, you know where you want your knight to be placed. You know that it will have to be from e6. So now how to reroute the knight from f6 to e6. And again, don't be afraid to be a magician. Some squares may not even be available right now. You need to make them available. This is how strategy works. Finding the exactly the perfect setup for your pieces. Your pieces are mobile, they're not fixed. You can do stuff with them, you know. I'm wondering if the chat knows once more.
So last time Bofanik had the threat of going through opponent territory that provoked a pawn move. This time the pawn's already on G3. So
but this was the fastest way. Hmm?
I feel like, for example, knight h5 to f4 to e6 is not an option because f4 is covered.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does that leave? There's d7 to f8 to e6. And d7 as the first move does also cover c5 for the moment.
True. But on the other hand, once you're going to try to...
If I'm defending the pawn from there, I can't keep teleporting, so...
You're tying down your knight. Mm-hmm.
How else am I getting to e6?
The chat is still struggling as well, so no worries.
Well, there is e8 to c7.
Wow.
I mean, I've got pieces there, but they can move. Rook d8 hits the queen and opens the first square, and then something like queen e7 defending the pawn opens the second square on that path.
I will create a poll for the viewer section. But if you are allowed to move your pieces, then there is a much faster and much more logical way of teleporting the knight.
h7 to f8 to e6 if I didn't have a pawn on h7.
But still your pawn on c5
doesn't do anything about the c5 pawn.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the chat has it.
If I start out through e8, there's also e8 g7 e6 instead of e8 c7.
Okay, it will be e6. So we get to d4, then to get to d4 we need e6. To get to e6 we need g7. How to get g7?
Bishop f8 defends the pawn.
Mm-hmm. Then? So bishop f8.
If I only free that, then I have knight h5 to g7.
Exactly. That's how it's supposed to be played. Why not playing queen e7 or queen a7? We don't want to engage the most valuable piece we have in defensive duties. And the bishop on g7 hardly does anything right now, so it's better to put it on f8 in order for it to have a purpose. And now knight h5, g7, e6, d4. Thanks to that maneuver, Fischer actually got a decent position because it was quite problematic due to the double pawns he had. He didn't manage to win the game eventually, but a draw was still okay out of this position. Can white play knight d2, knight b3, the chat is asking. Theoretically you could do that, but I'm not sure if this is so powerful, because at the end of the day the knight on b3 only has one purpose, and it's generally not that dangerous, because after after knight b3, now I can play something like queen a7, and this will be just temporary because I will play rook b8 and rook b4. I don't believe those knights are well positioned right now, and at some point I will still transfer the knight to e6 and then free my queen from his defensive duty. Knight h5 and f5, you shouldn't do that. Okay, Tai, how about the last example for today?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I thought that was a rhetorical question.
No.
I was waiting for it to appear on the board.
You can just say, you know what, I've had enough, or strategy kills me, or these examples are not going to ever occur on my board because I enjoy fire on the board. You could say something like that. Okay.
Well, if I only see one or two of them, they'll never occur on the board. But if I see enough of them in repetition, maybe they will. So
yeah, that's true. That's true. Quite a similar one. Those arrows don't apply anymore. I erased those already.
Look at that d5 weakness.
It's actually surprisingly that's a nice match actually.
Is white trying to put a knight on d5, or is black trying to put a knight on d4? And actually,
there was no hint. Absolutely. In any case, it's white's turn right now, and that's that's the only thing I have to say. White's turn. That's pretty much it. This is taken from Polugajewski against Untitled. Have you ever heard about those guys? Or not really?
I don't think so well.
Okay. No, Polugajewski was a Soviet master from the past. I think playing in the 70s or something.
His name sounded slightly familiar, but I'm not placing.
There's also Gajewski, who is a Polish grandmaster. So it's quite funny because Polugajewski is like half Gajewski, if you translate it. But yeah, he was playing in the 70s, and he made a he was the first time I've heard his name was when I heard about the journal he wrote about he was basically writing it was like his memoir from one of the tournaments with a lot of insightful analysis, like abstract from playing chess, like just psychological aspects, stuff like that. And Untitled was a German guy who was, I think, most famous for his lost games. So quite unlucky. No, a strong grandmaster, German grandmaster. In any case, white to move.
So after the last two examples, the very first thing my brain's drawn to is knight to b1 to c3 to d5 path.
Mm-hmm. As you can imagine, I already knew that you were going to spot the maneuvering options. So this example is slightly more difficult for a certain reason. We need to take into account our opponent's play as well. So what do you? Yeah, that's
those pesky opponents with their own plans.
Yeah, they shouldn't be allowed in the tournaments, right? We should only be like playing against the wall or against dummies. But that's true. That's the sad reality. They also want to win games. So,
like the very first thing I said was, is white trying to get to knight d5 to d5, or is black trying to get to d4? Black has a 2-move hop from f8 to e6 to d4 available. So if it is just a race to those squares, black might get in quicker.
Do we want black to be quicker? If the answer is yes, then be my guest, go knight b1.
I generally don't think of a question like that as having a yes answer that often. There are always times, maybe if the knight on d4 was not at all a concern,
yes,
it's super easy to trade off, and then it's worth letting them in first and then trading.
Yeah, exactly. But I agree. Generally, if there is a race like that, you want to be first, full stop. But I see your point, exactly. If knight d5 was a killing move, then why not?
Yeah, if knight d4 was whatever, but here it like hits our queen and stuff, so this isn't one of those times that we want them to be faster, I don't think. So do we play something like bishop h3 to slow them down?
And if knight e6?
Well, with the idea that we could trade on knight e6, but I'm not sure I like that either.
Why not?
Keeps the knight off of d4, but makes other concessions, like the bishop pair.
Like the bishop pair. So then we have the, the question of whether the bishop pair is so important. And when is it so important?
It's less important in closed positions, as far as I know.
Yes, very good.
The other thing about that, though, is if we want to, one thing I glanced at when I first looked at knight b1 was, am I losing the e-pawn? But I've got, with two attackers on it, but I have the queen and bishop defending it. If I go with that bishop h3 idea to trade on e6 so that they can't get to d4, now the bishop's no longer defending e4, so the knight b1 hop is now leaving that e4 pawn.
But you're not going to play those moves simultaneously, either bishop h3 or knight b1, so you don't have to play knight b1 immediately. This is a very important observation. In strategic positions where maneuvering is concerned, the timing is not that important.
Okay,
so you can just prepare that.
So essentially, in this starting position, the immediate knight b1 wouldn't hang e4 because the bishop is there, but it's too slow because it allows black's knight to get to d4 first. We can stop black's knight with bishop h3, threatening to trade it on e6 if it comes there. And if we do that, then we still have the idea of knight to b1 to c3 to d5, though we aren't going to immediately play it on our next move after the bishop trade because of the e4 pawn, but we have time to defend the e4 pawn and then route the knight through b1.
Precisely. So it is bishop h3. The bishop is not an important piece at all. So when I give this position to, because it's one of those positions I like giving to my students, many of them just try to make f4 work, just to, make the bishop a living animal. However, this is just a bad idea due to e takes f4, g takes f4, and something like knight e4. Sorry, probably like that, and then the knight on h4 is hanging simply. So
yeah,
if you're unable to open the diagonal for the bishop, it just makes perfect sense to play bishop h3, and then after knight e6 we're okay with trading, and after rook takes e6 it's possible to reroute the knight from h4 already, or you can first play even a move like f3. This is not going to be a concession, because you're actually strengthening the pawn on e4. The bishop on h7 is locked. Now you're okay with transferring either this knight or actually the other one. Up to you. And nothing is going to stop you. And that's pretty much it. So the maneuvering, knight b1, knight c3, is a good idea for white. However, you also need to take into account black's not attacking prospects, but, you know, ways to improve the position in general. So prophylaxis also plays an important role. Chat is asking whether pawn to e6 is any good. This is a horrific way to change the pawn structure for black. Yes, it does not allow white's knights to jump to either f5 or d5. On the other hand, the pawn on e5 is going to be a huge liability, and it will be so easy for white to attack it. And again, you don't need to rush. So my first move will probably be something like f4, like f3, and slowly regrouping. Maybe at the end of the day, bishop c3, queen b2, maybe somehow rerouting the knight to d3. I have all the time in the world to do that. I just don't believe it's a good idea. This bishop is out of play. This bishop on h7 is also out of play, and I don't really see any prospects for this piece. So it's not a good idea. I mean, you could try that, but I don't feel persuaded by this idea. Another point, perhaps after f takes e6, there is f4, but also doesn't make sense to play like that, because of course the idea is to meet e takes f4 with e5, but at the same time, what if black just ignores that with a move like knight d7? You could play f5, leaving this a bad bishop, but I'm just not so sure if this is a kind of a progress we're trying to make. I'd rather just keep the pawns fixed, play f3, and take it slowly. Improve the knight's position, and generally, in long run, try to hit this pawn on e5. This should be the idea. Because f4, it probably will be possible to play that at any point, if needed. Does it make sense?
I'm just sitting here repeating the words "take it slow" in my brain a few times to remind myself that I'm allowed to do that. It makes sense. It's easy for it to make sense in a specific position when we've looked at why it makes sense in this position. That doesn't mean it comes naturally to me. So I'm just
that's true.
I'm just going to, you know, spend most of the rest of the day saying you're allowed to take it slow. You're allowed to take it slow at sort of random moments.
You can use sticky notes, you know, just when playing. There is some of my students actually have it, like look for worst place pieces, do that, don't do that. Of course, don't do that when the main event comes, but until that, so that it sinks into your mind, why not? Okay. I have nothing smarter to say than that today. This was my best piece of advice for today, honestly. Okay. Right, so tomorrow we're going to have a tactical torture session. It's officially going to be called this way. 9 p.m. Polish time. What is it going to be for you?
It's noon for me.
Okay. So get a good breakfast, because it will be difficult. I promise that.
Excellent.
Right, and yeah, I think it will be great if you in the meantime, like in between the sessions, just try to identify, like look at your games, most recent, specifically losses or games where you remember you had problems early on in the opening. Try to identify those situations. You can also take a look at your the rivals you're going to meet in the final tournament, and see what openings they play, and maybe consider what may happen over the board, so that the thing that happened against Nargaev doesn't happen in the tournament, right?
Yeah, I haven't looked too much at Blue Jays openings. I know
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'll say
Blue Jay plays also quite aggressively, so, and plays very fast.
Falk, Blue Jay, and Nargaf are the three I'm going to say I'm most concerned about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I need to be careful. I don't get myself into trouble underestimating someone else. Also, like I did against Nordovich, or
exactly. Exactly, but it's going to be a, something good, because I know you have all of those courses, I know you have your own repertoire, so it will be probably pointless for me to try to change your opening life in this period of time we have. So I think it's going to be much better if we work on your tactical technique, on some strategic aspects, and also on the end games, of course, because there is going to be an end game event. And in the meantime, you on your own, in your self-studying, work on your openings. That will be the most efficient, in my opinion. And also,
I'll say, I have one opening related sort of side goal along the way, which is I really need to get something out of my Alapin against Blue Jay. He plays the Sicilian. And
we can take a look at that. That's a good note. So what
only
does he play against Alapin?
Alexandra, I watched her stream on how she was rating players, and apparently for playing the Alapin, she blacklisted me as a draft candidate, and then she took Blue Jay, so I want to beat one of her players with the Alapin.
We do that, okay.
And that looks like my opportunity, because Lula plays the Caro, so.
Okay.
That'll be sort of a side goal, but that's less important than, winning games and playing well. And
Sure. Sounds like a plan. Okay, so also I will also send you those exercises in a PGN format, so that you can take a look at them in your free time. And we're seeing each other tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Any questions? Any concerns? Anything left unsaid?
Not right now.
Okay, great. Okay, so thanks and goodbye, audience. I'll see you tomorrow, 9 p.m. Polish time. And thanks for watching.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.